Hey YouTube, how's it going? Thanks for joining us here at the FFP. Today we're going to do our Week 13 waiver wire video. For those of you who haven't watched this sort of our content before, what we're going to try to do is cover every position as well as try to cover people who are highly available, a little bit available, and very rarely available. Try to get a wide range so that no matter what type of league you're in, what type of player you're looking for, we can hopefully find you some talent. Although it is getting late into the season, things can certainly get sparse. There's always things to look for. Now, some other news before we get started is make sure to keep an eye out for our contest that we're going to be running through the playoffs so we can continue some fantasy and have some fun. Unfortunately, we don't have a ton of information on that right now, but just keep an eye out for our other videos. It'll be free, it'll be fun, and of course, you can win some merch or something like that. And then the other thing is that if you guys are looking for daily posts, unfortunately we post about 3 times a week, sometimes only 2 if it's rare, but we try to post on our community tab. If you're watching the video on your phone right now, you can just slide right down, will become a little box down there, and you can go to our community tab and see every day we post an image with some interesting stats. We've done Aaron Jones, we've done Andrew Luck, just a nice little bit of content to give you guys every day while we work on creating some other content for other videos. Of course, you guys are going to have to contextualize this information for your league and understand that every player we talk about may not be available. But without any further ado, let's just get right into it and start.
So if you're looking for a quarterback out there, one of the guys that we think you need to consider this week is Dak Prescott, Dallas Cowboys quarterback, who's 53% available. This week he's got a great matchup versus New Orleans Saints, who got the 5th most points to quarterbacks. Now, this is a game where Dak and the Dallas offense is going to need to throw a lot and play catch-up with a potent offense that currently right now the Saints offense is #1 in the NFL, and they are scoring 37.2 points per game, so you know Dallas is going to have to throw a lot to keep pace in this game. Now, if you look at Dak Prescott, as the year's gone on, he's increased his production, he's gotten better and better. In fact, if you look at the first 3 weeks of the year, okay, the first 3 games of the season, he was averaging 11.47 fantasy points per game. In the last 8 games, he's increased that to 21.82 fantasy points per game, so he has a huge boost in his production. I think another huge thing that I like about Dak Prescott is the addition of Amari Cooper there. He's been a huge boost to the passing game. They needed some wide receivers, they needed some weapons, and he's really helped quite a bit. With Cooper in the lineup, Dak Prescott is averaging 253 yards per game passing the ball. Without Cooper, he was only averaging 202 passing yards per game, so there's a huge increase there. And I think what it is, it's not just that he's better. What it takes is that guy before maybe Michael Gallup or whoever it was, Cole Beasley was facing #1 corner. Well, now they face #2 corner. He faces #1 corner. So there's a domino effect. How does a positive effect on that lineup there? And the other thing that's been huge lately is Dak Prescott's had 5 rushing touchdowns the last 6 games. So I think this week is going to be a good volume play in a game. They're going to have to throw the ball a lot. They're playing at home. Now, I do have a little bit of apprehension. The apprehension I have is not necessarily Dak and the offense. I think they're playing well. I think he's a guy that you can trust to be a decent play. But that Saints defense is playing better. But for me, the one thing that kind of offsets that concerns is they are playing in Dallas. So once again, I like Dak Prescott, 53% available, playing the Saints who get the 5th most points to quarterbacks. So,
all right, that's solid. All right, another option that you can look to, and we've probably mentioned him far too many times this season, but he's still 54% available, so why not Jameis Winston? Not only is he playing Carolina, who gives up the 7th most points to quarterbacks, but he's played pretty well this season. In fact, just last week in his last game, he threw for 312 yards, 2 touchdowns. He had a couple, I believe, 24 rushing yards. He's been playing fairly well. He's had 2 games this year, one week where he was the #1 fantasy scoring quarterback, and another where he was the 3rd, despite really not having that many opportunities. Of course, we all know that like the Bucs loved him coming in. He was, first round, first overall. The hype was real, and he was really starting to produce. In fact, his first 3 years, he had an increasing quarterback rating each of those first 3 years, and so he had gotten better. And then, like what's going on this year? Well, he struggled. He turned the ball over. He had some issues, and then, of course, he lost his job to Fitzpatrick. But we also kind of have to remember Fitzpatrick was playing lights out. He was throwing 4 touchdowns a game multiple times, and so, of course, they should make that switch. But now they're back on Winston, and so I think, again, we have to remember, yeah, he did lose his job there for a little bit, but that's kind of a different situation. I don't know if we've ever seen a team have 2 quarterbacks play at such a high level, and it's because the defense is so bad, the running game's so bad, that they have to throw the ball a ton. And on top of that, that offense is 1st in the NFL for yards. I believe they're getting about 458 yards of total offense averaging over a game. They're beating the Rams, the Saints, they're beating the
Pat
Chiefs.
Mahomes in Kansas City, yeah.
Absolutely. And so, yeah, again, at 54%, Jameis Winston's a very good choice in an offense that throws the ball a lot, that has lots of weapons, and needs him to perform. So, again, Jameis Winston at 54%.
All right. Next guy you may want to consider out there is Mitch Trubisky, the Chicago Bears quarterback, who's only 27% available, but 27% still means for 1 every 4 league out there, he's available on the waiver wire. Playing the Giants this week will allow the 10th fewest points at quarterback, so it seems like a tougher matchup there. So I look at Mitch Trubisky. I think early in the year he struggled. First 3 games he looked like the quarterback of last year, but then things really started to pick up for him. He got a hold of Nagy's offense. Things started to improve. Then he had a stretch of weeks 4 through 8 where he averaged 33.28 fantasy points per game. He was lights out great. And then 2 of the next 3 games he was kind of quiet. But if you look at those games there, part of that was game flow. The Bears destroyed the Bills in that game, and they didn't need to throw the ball quite a bit. They destroyed them, had 2 defensive touchdowns. There's not really a need for him to put up the numbers. Then they played the Vikings. He had a quiet game versus the Vikings there, but if you watch that game, and it's hard for me to say it as a Vikings fan, but honestly, the Bears were the better team. They controlled that game. And so they really played it safe. Their play calling versus a Vikings defense that's pretty good there. And if you take a look at the score looked closer than it actually was. And so I think they played it conservative. They didn't ask them to do too much. They did exactly what they needed to do to beat the Vikings there. And then sandwiched in between those 2 games where he was quiet, he had a huge game versus Detroit. So I look at Mitch Trubisky, the offense, how he's done, how he's performed. To me, it's not a matter whether or not he's going to be productive. To me, it's a matter of health. Is he going to be ready to play this week? We know he missed Thanksgiving because of an injury. Well, Mitch Trubisky, his shoulder is not a lock to return against the Giants in Week 13, according to ESPN's Adam Schefter. Trubisky is hopeful of suiting up next week, although his availability is uncertain at this point. So once again, I like Mitch Trubisky, 27% available versus the Giants, but we do have to monitor his health this week to see if he's going to be ready. I'm sure that about midweek, about Wednesday, Thursday, we'll kind of have an idea.
All right, what about Baker Mayfield? For starters, he's a rookie. He's exciting, so why not get excited about him? He's 45% available, which means he's going to be an option for most of you out there, about half of you out there. One thing to note, he does have a tough matchup this week against the Texans, who allow the 5th fewest points to quarterbacks. But if you're feeling confident and you feel like that might not necessarily be an issue, because it might not. Not every week not every week are they quite that good. He's been playing well. If you look at his season stats as a whole, it's a bit deceiving because it hasn't been unbelievably impressive. But he started the year not the starter, of course. Tyrod Taylor did, and then he came in his first 4 games and he wasn't great. He threw 4 touchdowns to 5 interceptions, but that's just part of being a rookie quarterback and having that huge learning curve. Since then, he's thrown 13 touchdowns to only 2 interceptions. He's played great. In fact, he's had 3 games with a quarterback rating of over 100, and 2 of those games were in the last 2 games where he's had a quarterback rating of 143 or better. So despite the tough matchup, his high availability and the way that he's been playing makes him a fairly good option this week. Baker Mayfield at 45%.
So on these videos, we don't just talk about guys that you should pick up. We know there's a lot of people out there that are going to be trendy in conversation about who you should pick up. So sometimes we'll talk about a player that we'll talk about maybe why you should take a look at the guy, but ultimately we would advise you against that. And here's a guy that I want to talk about that people may be considering, Matthew Stafford, a guy that for years has been a pretty quality quarterback out there. And he is 30% available playing the Rams this week, who'll give the 10th most points to quarterbacks. So initially that looks like a pretty good matchup for him, right? Now, after week 1, he had a bad week 1, but then he had a 6-week stretch after that, weeks 2 through 7, that he looked really good. During that stretch, he had 12 touchdown passes to only 1 interception. But since then, the wheels have really come off for him in that offense. Since then, the last 4 games, he's had 3 touchdown passes to 4 interceptions. 2 of those games, he had fantasy totals of 8.56 points and 5.44 points. So he had 2 games that were just brutal. So what's going on there? Well, I think one, the loss of Golden Tate in a trade. Look at Marvin Jones and Kerryon Johnson being injured, and a few other factors have really led to that offense struggling, and of course he's struggling there. And then you add to that, he's playing a Rams defense that in terms of creating pressure on the quarterback and turnovers, they can be very tough to face. So it looks like a good match initially, but there are concerns there. There are some red flags. Now the positive thing, they are playing at home, and they're playing a game where they'll need to throw a lot. They're playing a Rams offense that's third in the NFL right now, scoring 35.4 points a game. And so he's a guy that I would consider a high risk and high reward. When I look at him, if you're really desperate, you could probably play him, but I would probably advise looking elsewhere, trying to find a safer pick. But if no one's out there, he's a guy playing at home against a Rams defense that has allowed the 10th most points to quarterbacks. Maybe you could roll your dice once again. He is a high risk, high reward play this week.
All right. All right, so now we got to talk about the Ravens quarterback situation, and I'll start by just saying pretty simply that it's not pretty. As far as fantasy option goes, I'm going to try to avoid both of them. Joe Flacco is 85% available and Lamar Jackson is 60%, but despite their availability and their good matchup, I don't think that you should be touching either of them. While Atlanta, who they're facing this week, does give up the third most fantasy points to quarterbacks, you still have to understand I don't think this is a great setup. For starters, Joe Flacco is currently marked as out, and Coach John Harbaugh said that he will be the starter when he's healthy. I think that's absolutely huge as far as that goes with Lamar Jackson, and of course if he plays, that does go a long way towards using Joe Flacco. However, he hasn't been great, and the way things are looking, it honestly isn't looking like he's going to play. He's marked as out. It's not probable, it's not questionable, right? It's not most likely or whatever. It just says out right now, and we haven't heard a lot of information. He hasn't been practicing, and so there's that. On the Lamar Jackson side, if he starts, I really don't think that that's a good thing. I'm not too excited about that. For one, and you've been saying this, he's been getting more carries than he should have. This is not a pace of carries that he can keep up. He's not Cam Newton. He can't carry the ball 20 times, and that's really the way. If you watch those games that they've been running, John Harbaugh is a pretty smart guy, and I think he understands that Jackson's not throwing the ball very well, and he needs to get what he can out of him, get those rushing yards to keep the ball moving, and so there's that. But when you look at the way he's passing, it's just not working. First game he went out, he only completed 13 passes and he had an interception. The second game he went out and completed 14 passes with 2 interceptions. So the production's not there. I'm just going to avoid that whole situation. The tight end, the receiving core, it's just not a great situation at all, and so I'd stay away from it.
All right.
All right.
So what about Eli Manning, who is 75% available? Well, he plays the Bears this week, who are allowing the 13th fewest points to quarterbacks. So they're kind of stingy allowing points to quarterbacks. But in actuality, that could have improved that number as of recent. They've gotten better in terms of facing quarterbacks and points allowed there. In fact, if you look at the last 5 games, they're only allowing 13.36 points per game to quarterbacks. That's very difficult there. They also look at the Bears. They had a stretch there between weeks 6 through 8 where they only had 2 total sacks that they had created. Khalil Mack is back. He is healthy, and since then, the last 4 games, they had 14 sacks. Currently, the Bears are allowing the 3rd fewest yards per game at 316. And then to top it off, as far as giveaway, takeaway, they lead the NFL in that differential. So that is a defense that's just very, very tough to face. And so you add on top of that, Evan Ingram is going to be out most likely. We'll see. He left last game. There's a lot of question marks about his availability. Just the fact that Eli Manning has been really average at best this year. And so for that reason, even though he's widely available and you may look at him as an option, I would advise staying away from Eli Manning this week.
All right, so now some other names that we're going to mention, some people that have risk. I don't know, Rob, this is a section you decided we should talk about, so what exactly is it, I guess? Call them like quick hitters, people who are maybe widely available we want to mention, but we don't have a whole lot to say on them. I guess, would you say that's a good summary of this?
Yeah, we talked about a few guys that had risk. Here's a few more guys that are out there that you may be considering that we'd also say probably are higher risk, but we thought we'd cover them for you and just give our thoughts just briefly. So I think you got the first guy there.
Yes, I do. All right, so first guy's Blake Bortles. He's 80% available, and quite honestly, that's probably not available enough. I'm surprised to find that 1/5 of all leagues have somebody owns him in. While they play Indianapolis Colts, who have an average pass defense, you have to remember that Bortles has been absolutely brutal. Over the last 2 games, he's averaging just 115 passing yards, and he's thrown 2 picks. They've really just come to a place in that offense where they're not letting him throw the ball. They're playing defense and running it, and they're keeping that score low. And when he is throwing the ball, he's not throwing the ball well. Not to mention, like, that team, that coaching staff, and that organization, they've already said that they're making plans. They're working on next year. They're going new quarterback. I mean, you have to play pretty bad to the point where season's not even over and they know they don't want you back and they don't want you as their starting quarterback. And so, yeah, Blake Bortles, he is a starting quarterback. He does have a little bit of upside, yes, but is a very risky pick. I see a lot of downside there.
Yeah, one of the things I'm looking forward to doing is when this season is over, and go back and do a review video. Go back to our predictions before the season, guys, that we talked about, and just kind of evaluate how do we do it. Let's just be open and honest about it. And I think that we've nailed some picks, and we'll be off on a few. That's going to happen. That's inevitable. What I think is funny, though, is that when we write about a pick, we don't hear a lot. But when we're wrong about a pick, you kind of give us an earful, and that's okay. We love to hear that. But he was one guy, Blake Bortles, that we were adamantly against going into this year, and I think he's just proven the point. This guy is not a good quarterback. He is simply not a guy that you can trust. You have an occasional game here and there in the right matchup where you have garbage time statistics, but honestly can't trust him. And so stay away from Blake Bortles. So all you out there that are hating on us, love for you to come back and say maybe we were right about that one, but I'm sorry. Maybe that's my pride on that one. So anyways, guy I want to talk about there I think you should look at avoiding is Marcus Mariota. He is 68% available. Playing the Jets, give up the 14th fewest points to quarterbacks. Now that Jets defense is not good. That Jets defense can be exposed. That's not an issue for me. For me, the real issue is just the up and down play that he's had this year. You need to watch Monday night's game. This is late Sunday night. The Vikings just got done beating the Packers. Go Vikings. Anyways, we need to watch Monday night's game to see if Marcus Mariota has re-injured that elbow. Is going to affect his play. I know early in the year it limited certain throws that he couldn't make. He's a guy that carries a lot of risk. And if you're starting him in week 13, for a lot of you, that's the final week of the season. You're probably looking for a win. Maybe you're on the bubble to get in. Maybe you're trying to lock up a division or a bye in the first week. And can you really trust this guy? In 3 games this season, he averaged 27.8 points per game. He was very solid. But the other 6 games, he averaged 7.7 points per game. He's a guy that's just simply way too risky at this point. We don't know about his health, his injuries, his weapons aren't great there. And so even though his matchup isn't necessarily bad, I would try to stay away from Marcus Mariota if you can help it.
All right. And then another guy to mention is Derek Carr. Derek Carr is 82% available, and I think he is kind of this week the absolute definition of very, very high risk, right? Is you got a home run with him or you're going to strike out? As far as that strikeout side, the downside to him, he doesn't have great weapons. His best wide receiver right now is this guy named Aitman, I believe I'm saying that correctly. Yeah. Most people probably don't know who he is. I didn't know who he was going into the season. He's a new name to me, and he's their best guy. So it's really tells you he doesn't have a lot of weapons. But when you look on the positive side, he's playing Kansas City, who gives up the 4th most points to quarterbacks, and they're going to score their points. That offense is awesome. And that's going to force Derek Carr to throw the ball a lot, and so there is some high upside on that. But again, that's a really risky pick this week, and so Derek Carr, again, we just want to mention it because he is so available. It's rare, but there are some people in 2 quarterback leagues, or maybe you're just looking for some depth, or for whatever reason. I guess Derek Carr might be a choice this week.
Yeah, another guy you might be looking at out there is Andy Dalton, who's 41% available. Andy plays the Denver Broncos, giving the 16th fewest points to quarterbacks. He injured his thumb today, and he is day-to-day with a thumb sprain. That's kind of the injury that he has there. The first 4 games this season, he looked pretty good. During that first 4-game stretch, he had 11 touchdown passes. He was averaging 299 passing yards per game, but since then, he's really begun to struggle. Now, he's playing a decent Denver defense, and A.J. Green might miss the game, but even if he does make it back into the game, I think we can safely assume that he's not going to be 100%. So there's a lot of reasons why I would stay away from Andy Dalton, even though he is 41% available out there.
All right. So that's our quarterbacks. Now, I think unless you have anything else to add, let's move on and get to those running backs, because that's a real interesting position. Or do you have more?
You want one quick name out there that he came back today. Ryan Tannehill came back, and he is 94% available. He had some games early in the year. He wasn't bad. Today he was decent, but he's playing the Bills defense that allowed the fewest points to quarterbacks. The Bills are not a good team, but their defense is very good. In fact, that defense is very underrated. So stay away from Ryan Tannehill. So I guess that'd be the last one there.
Sounds good.
So running backs are so hard to come by out there, and injuries can happen at any moment. We found out with Melvin Gordon. We're going to talk about him shortly, but today he left with looks like possibly a knee sprain, an MCL sprain, and you just realize how difficult it is out there. So I want to give you a running back that you should consider picking up, not just a guy to stash on the bench, but a guy I think that you can start moving forward that has huge value for. His name is Gus Edwards, running back of the Ravens, who is 40% available. He's playing Atlanta this week, who allowed the most points to running backs. Currently, that Atlanta defense are 29th in the NFL, allowing 27.9 points per game. That defense is a defense that can be exposed. Now, last week in our waiver wire video, we did promote him. Now, one of the things that I wanted to see going into this week was whether or not his usage from the coach would reinforce the fact that they were comfortable going to a rookie running back as their lead back. Sometimes coaches struggle with going to rookies as their lead back because they may struggle in pass protection. They may have difficulty understanding the playbooks, even though they run the ball very well. The NFL is very complex. Some coaches will struggle to commit to a rookie running back, even if he's talented and proving that he can be successful running the ball. Well, we've had back-to-back weeks now. It's very clear that this guy's their lead back at this point. He's a guy that's been great. Today he had 23 carries, 118 yards. He had a 5.1 yards per carry. The week before, he had 70 carries, 115 yards, and a touchdown. So this is a guy that in 2 weeks has had 233 yards and a yards per carry of 5.83. This guy needs to be picked up. Not only picked up, this guy needs to be picked up and started next week without hesitation. He looks like he's legit. He's the real deal. I like Gus Edwards out there.
All right, another running back who actually looks pretty legit and who you, I guess, keyed on to me first. You found him and you've been really talking him up for many weeks now is Josh Adams. He's 50% available. He goes against Washington, who does allow the 11th fewest, which is, again, that's a little bit tough, but that's not terrible. But what's nice is that the Eagles have said that they plan to use him as their main back, their feature back, the top back in that offense, which is huge. Something that, again, you've been saying for a while and kind of how he's been performing. Last game he had 22 carries for 84 yards, a touchdown, and a 2-point conversion. And one thing, we always look at the stats. We love numbers. We love those facts. But you can never replace simply watching a game. And a lot of people wouldn't know unless you watch the Eagles game. He had a 52-yard touchdown run that was called back due to holding. I believe it was Jason Kelce that held, and it had almost nothing to do with the play. In fact, if that whole holding didn't happen, he probably would have scored anyways. But again, he is just performing so well. And he's meant to be used as the main guy in that offense. It's surprising to me that he's still 50% available. Again, not the easiest matchup ever, but as Washington, an elite defense, certainly not the case. And so that's not a huge concern. Again, Josh Adams, he's a great pick this week. It's going to be hard for you to find better options than Gus Edwards and Josh Adams in the last couple of weeks of the season. That's for sure.
So another guy I want to talk about out there is Derrick Henry, who's 42% available. Now this week he's playing the Giants, allowing the 15th most points to running backs. He's had 4 touchdowns in the last 4 weeks, but he started the year, he was kind of brutal. In fact, he started the year, his yards per carry at 3.3, and this is a guy in our preseason we warned against a number of times. But he's really picked up the last 2 games. The last 2 games, his yards per carry at 5.2, and so the question is he back? Has he turned a corner? Is this a guy that you can trust? I'm going to say I don't think so. I'm going to kind of warn against him a little bit there. Now, he did have a very nice game versus New England. And last game, it looked like he had a productive game there. But if you actually watch the game, you got to break it down. Sometimes numbers can be deceiving, right? So if you broke the game down, what you saw in that game is he labored early on. He struggled running the ball. And then what happened was they fell behind quickly. The score at one point was 31-3. They were losing. Well, that really shifted. Most of his yards came after that point when the defense that they were facing really kind of gave up on the run and played pass defense. They were in pre-vet defense at that point. So he got a lot of those yards against some soft defenses that were in pass coverage. This is a guy that if you look at it, he's not great in passing situation. For this year, he's only got 8 catches for 54 yards, and that's been in the way his whole career has won. He's not very good in the passing game. If you look at Deion Lewis in there, he's really a more versatile back, and he's more productive in there, and so I think he's always going to downplay Henry's role there. In the previous video, we kind of broke some things down. We talked about some analytics that kind of warned why he was going to have an off year, and I think that he's proven that those concerns were legitimate. With that said, here's what I'd say about him. With injuries coming all the time, you can never have enough running back depth on your bench. You simply cannot do that. So what I would say is that he's worth a bench stash at this point. He's not a guy that I would pick up. I would not trust starting him. I don't think he's turned a corner. I think that was a statistical anomaly that we've seen there, but it can hurt to have him on your bench if you have space. So that's kind of where I land with this guy. I don't think you're going to pick him up and run with him to the Super Bowl, your fantasy championship, but I think he should be there. You never know what might happen. Lewis could get hurt, or there could be a number of things. Yes, the other thing I want to mention with him too is that his value is only in standard leagues. In PPR leagues, I definitely would not even consider picking this guy up. So that's my take on Derrick Henry. If you're looking at him, he is 42% available with a decent matchup this week.
All right, now let's talk about Austin Ekeler and, of course, a little bit Justin Jackson. So here's the thing. Melvin Gordon now, and I believe, Rob, you have a little bit more of the details on this, but Melvin Gordon looks to be injured. Did you say it was MCL?
Yeah, so he goes into the game. He was already questionable entering into the game. He had some injuries, but they went ahead and played him, and then he hurt his leg on a play that he was whipped. His leg got whipped, and the initial reports are it's an MCL injury. The reports are they think it's a sprain, but we won't know until tomorrow. It could be an MCL tear. We hope that's not the case. But even if it's a sprain, I think safely can expect he's going to miss, probably 1 to 2 games.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, the official reports aren't out, but when you go into a game banged up and then you leave that game hurt even more, especially in something like an MCL, I certainly think he's going to not be playing at least for 1 week. And so we look at guys who can replace them, and that's Austin Ekeler and Justin Jackson. And so you talked about this. We talked about this earlier. The way we think this is going to kind of work out, because, we haven't really seen the Chargers without Melvin Gordon for a full game this season. We haven't seen that in a very long time. Is how is this going to work out? And we imagine that Justin Jackson is going to take the load as the running back, and hopefully Austin Ekeler is going to essentially keep the role that he has had in that offense, where he does a little bit of running, but he does a lot in the passing game. One thing to note is that they do play Pittsburgh, who's with the 6th fewest points to running backs, so that certainly hurts them. But they have been effective. Justin Jackson got 7 carries for 57 yards. In case you can't do the math in your head, that is 8.1 yards per carry. So he was certainly running the ball well. And Austin Ekeler doing what he always does. He touched the ball 8 times and got 69 yards and a touchdown, so he also looked very good. I like Austin Ekeler a little bit if you're in a PPR league and you're looking to replace Melvin Gordon. If he's your handcuff, he could certainly be a good start this week. It is kind of a goofy situation because it's a tough matchup. I'm going to say definitely I wouldn't probably be starting or rolling with Justin Jackson. He might be... I don't know necessarily if he's worth a pickup. He's definitely absolutely worth watching. But can you really say that he has long-term value? I'm going to say no. And do you really think he's got short-term value? Maybe, but he's risky. We haven't seen him play. We don't quite know what his role is. Again, he was productive in his yards per carry last week, but only a little bit. So certainly pick up Austin Ekeler if you can. He's 32% available. But I don't know, Justin Jackson, the guy I'm probably going to leave on the waiver wire and watch unless I'm in a very deep league. Sometimes I'm in 16-team leagues, and I'm just scrambling for anything I can get.
Yeah, you look at Austin Ekeler, the guy's been very effective in passing situations. In fact, you talked about his 8 touches. He actually also had a number of catches today, not including that. He's been very effective in PPR leagues. But earlier this year, there was a game in London where Melvin Gordon sat out and Austin Ekeler became the lead back. I had to start in that game. I owned Gordon in a league, and I thought Austin Ekeler would have a good game, and he had an okay game. He didn't have a great game. And I think what it is like you said, he's got that role that's defined. He's very clear there. He does great in passing situations, third down, things like that. I think I want to keep him in that role. I think Justin Jackson is going to be the guy that's probably going to get those primary carries. But we'll find out a lot more tomorrow when the injury report comes out. So that's kind of where we land with that. For some of you, if you're like me, you own Gordon, you're probably heartbroken right now, just praying that it's just a sprain and that he only misses a week or 2 at the best. But keep your eye on those guys.
Of course, and we'll make sure to post something about it as news comes out. That's why you should make sure to follow our Instagram. And of course, you can check out the community page on our YouTube channel, where we'll put updates and some interesting stats on there as well.
So I want to talk about LeGarrette Blount at this point, who is 87% available. So going into Thanksgiving, a lot of people are pushing out there. There's some conversation in the fantasy community about picking this guy up and playing him. I advise sitting him on Thanksgiving. Entering into that game, he had a yards per carry of 2.3. Last 4 games, he had 16 yards on 21 carries. He had struggled all year. I said he shouldn't even be rostered. I still stand by that today. If you play the numbers, 9 out of 10 times, you're going to be successful, and in the end of the year, you're going to be near the top. But he goes out Thanksgiving, he blows up, he has 19 carries, 88 yards, and 2 touchdowns. But even after the game, even with that good game put on there statistically, his yards per carry for the year is still only 2.8. It just tells you how brutal he's been all year long. Now, in Week 13, he faces the Rams, who give the 15th fewest points to running backs. Now, if you look at backs like LeGarrette Blount, I think if you continue to feed him the ball and feed him the ball, they can get stronger as the game goes on. They can wear down defenses. So maybe he's a guy that if you want, he could get maybe 15, 20 carries. Maybe he could be successful. That's not going to happen in this game. They're going to fall behind the Rams and need to throw the ball. Well, here's the thing. LeGarrette Blount is not used much in the passing game. He simply is not. And so what's going to happen is in those passing situations, Theo Riddick's going to be on the field. And so he's going to be lucky if he gets 8 to 10 carries. Another factor there is Kerryon Johnson could be back this week. So there's a million reasons why I would stay away from LeGarrette Blount. I think what he had was what I would call a statistical anomaly in that game there. So I think I'd stay away from him. I wouldn't even consider picking him up, even though he had a good game there. Johnson's probably going to be back very soon. I think they're going to have to throw the ball a lot in that game. I think overall, minus that one game, he's had a very bad year, so I would probably just stay away from him if you can.
All right, what about the other running back in that offense, Theo Riddick? I certainly do like Theo Riddick as a PPR running back, and I do like that he's 49% available. He's always been a very excellent pass catcher. He's always been very involved in the passing game and able to catch the ball to the backfield. That is extremely important in an offense that clearly needs it. They don't have any strong tight ends. Of course, they traded away Golden Tate. Marvin Jones has been hurt. That leaves you with just Kenny Golladay. And who's next up on the line? Really, he's the second option, Theo Riddick is. He went out, excuse me, having trouble speaking right now. Over the last 4 games, he's had 28 targets. That's 7 targets per game. And of those 28 targets, he's turned those into 25 catches. Like, he's really been productive in that sense. I do not think that he has a whole lot of value in standard leagues. I'm not too excited about him. I'm not too hyped on his standard value. But if you're looking for a PPR running back, he fits in that offense very well, and they need to throw him the ball. And, he's going to get you, 7 points just on catches, let alone the yards and the fact that he should be able to find the end zone in a game where they play the Rams and they're going to be throwing the ball. So, yeah, I like Theo Riddick in PPR leagues, but again, know your league scoring and understand that. So Theo Riddick, 32% or 49% available.
So let's talk about the Raiders backfield. Let's look at Jalen, Richard, depending upon how you want to say it. I've heard it both ways. I don't really care. You know what I'm talking about anyways. He's 58% available, and then you have Doug Martin, 53% available. So they're playing Kansas City this week, allowing the second most points to running back. So that looks like a good matchup there. Now, if you look at Martin, he got benched midway through the Cardinals game. The coach came out and said, well, the reason why he did is he wanted to get Washington more touches. So going into Week 12, his status as a lead back was really in question. He's an older back. I think that team, the Raiders, are looking to the future, looking at rebuilding. So is he going to be in those plans? Well, today he goes out and he gets double-digit carries for the 5th consecutive game, really solidifying that he is their lead back, and he did have a rushing touchdown. He added to that. So I look at him this week. I think that he's got a limited ceiling, but he does have some value if you're desperate. But here's the thing going into this game. Kansas City's going to score the points. They're going to get behind, and the Raiders are going to have to throw the ball quite a bit. And so when they're going to throw the ball like that, very much like the Lions versus the Rams, in this game, for me, Jalen has the value. He's a guy that's going to be on the field a lot. I think he's highly involved in the passing game. He's got PPR value. Right now in the year, he's got 51 catches. That's very good for him. And so I think that when I look at the two backs there, if I look at Jalen, look at Doug Martin, for me, the guy that I put my money on, especially in PPR leagues, is Jalen Richard. I think he's the guy that's going to get more play, more touches in this game. Once again, I think that Martin has some value, but I think they're going to fall behind. If he gets 10 to 12 carries, I think that would be surprising. So that's my take on that running back situation.
All right, it feels like every time I do a waiver wire video, we talk about Peyton Barber. And again, Peyton Barber is a pretty bland and unexciting running back to look at as far as start sit, as far as waiver wire. But starting to get pretty slim pickings out there. And so for a guy like that, who is the starting back for Tampa Bay, to be 34% available, it's hard not to look at him. While he does play Carolina, who gives up the 9th fewest points to running backs, that is above average. That's pretty good. You can't ignore the fact that, again, he is the solid back there. And I like that even though they are a good run defense, it's not like playing the Rams or the Chiefs or the Saints. I don't think that Carolina's going to absolutely go off and score 45 points on you, which means Tampa Bay should be able to run the ball throughout all 4 quarters of the game. I think that it should be at least relatively close enough where they don't have to abandon the run game. And I think by sheer volume, that definitely gives him some value. But again, not an exciting pick, not an amazing pick, but he is a guy to pick up this week, and he still should be out there. I don't know what you think about that, Rob. If you have anything to add, but it's pretty much it.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is I think his value is primarily in standard leagues, not in PPR leagues. That's kind of where I would say that threshes out. So
absolutely.
So we'll just do a few other running backs out there, some consideration. One guy I want to talk about is Yeldon, the running back for the Jacksonville Jaguars. Now, I don't think this is going to happen, but it's a possibility that Leonard Fournette could get suspended. Now, if you watch the game, there's a big brawl that happened today with the Bills. He threw some punches, got kicked out of the game. Now, I don't think he's going to be suspended, but that could happen. League could hand down some suspensions. And if they did, Yeldon would become the primary back there, and his value also is boosted. He's got very good hands, so he's better in PPR leagues than standards. But keep an eye on what happens this week. If he does get suspended for Fournette, then Yeldon is a guy that you could pick up and run this week.
Yeah, another guy is Capri Bibbs. Now, this is a very specific situation. I won't talk on it too long. If Chris Thompson misses the game and does not play, and you're in a PPR league, Capri Bibbs might be a good option to pick up this week. But other than that, if it's a standard league or if Thompson plays, I'm going to avoid Bibbs.
All right. Another guy I'm going to talk about who's not highly available, but we always say you never know. I've seen owners do strange things. They get pinched for position and maybe they don't want to drop a defense they're going to roll with in playoffs, and so you never know who's going to be out there. Guy that's about 12% available is Matt Brate. He's playing Seattle, who allowed the 13th fewest points to running backs. Now, he's a guy that was banged up. He missed a lot of practice time. He was questionable for a lot of games, and we saw that reduction in production.
I love that. We got to say that more.
Reduction in production. So he struggled for a few games there, but he's healthy again. In the last 3 games, he's been very productive. And so he's a guy who's only 12% available, but for somebody he might be out there, go ahead and check. You never know.
Yeah, another guy. What about Kenyon Drake?
Yeah, Kenny Drake, I don't understand the coach there. He is so enamored with Frank Gore. I love Frank Gore. A great player, going to be a Hall of Famer. But it's time to move on. Whenever Drake touches the ball, this guy's electric.
Yeah. First off, you gotta like the matchup goes against the Bills, who give the 9th most points to running backs. And I swear every year there's some teams that just do the dumbest things, like with Frank Gore, where they just refuse to commit to the right running back. And they finally, I think, starting to turn a corner, and they're starting to go more Drake's way. And you know what? They're rewarded for it. He had 2 touchdowns last game, 1 rushing and 1 receiving. I expect this trend to continue, especially in a good matchup. So he's not highly available, but I think you'd be dumb not to pick him up if he was out there in most leagues. So yeah, I really like Kenyon Drake, but that situation just blows my mind that they refuse to commit to him.
Yeah, it reminds me very similar to the Jamal Williams and the Aaron Jones situation for the Packers. Everybody could see that Aaron Jones was by far and away the better running back, but they kept splitting carries and touches. I think they finally come to their senses there, and Aaron Jones is their lead guy, and we're seeing that he's very productive. Another guy out there that's not widely available, only 12% available, is Chris Carson, running back of Seattle. Playing San Francisco allowed the 17th fewest points to running backs, but it doesn't matter what matchup it is. Right now, Seattle leads the NFL in rushing yards. They are very committed to running the ball, and they do it well. And he is their back that when they run the ball quite a bit, he's fairly productive. So.
Yeah, and then the last guy that I want to mention is LaShawn McCoy. He's 14% available. Again, not highly. But if you're looking for a guy and he happens to be out there, might as well. He's only 2 games removed from having 2 touchdowns, 113 yards on 26 carries. He did struggle last game, 17 carries for 46 yards, but that's against Jacksonville's very, very tough defense, especially on the run. And so I wouldn't let that concern you too much. Again, he probably won't be out there, but if he is, he should be on somebody's bench. You should be picking him up.
And then the final guy I mentioned to you is a Duke Johnson, 27% available, playing the Texans, who allow the 10th most points to running backs. Duke's value is only in PPR leagues as a flex play, but he's somebody out there that maybe you could plug in this week.
All right, now we come to the wide receivers, and how can we not talk about DJ Moore? He's being picked up more and more every week, and now he's only 27% available, but that is still high enough that we should absolutely talk about him. For one, we absolutely love the matchup going against Tampa Bay, who allows the 3rd most points to tight ends. What I really like is that he's really had a great progression throughout his rookie season, right? It's not just does he come on the scene, how well does he play, but is he improving? And he didn't come on the scene, he wasn't very impressive at first. Throughout the first 3 games, he totaled 4 targets for 2 catches. That's 1.3 targets a game, 2/3 of a catch a game, only 18 yards. Like, that's not great. The production wasn't there. And then the next 5 games after that, he had 4.4 targets per game, 3.4 catches, and 41 yards. That's who he was averaging. And then really turned the corner. The last 3 games, he's averaging 7.3 targets a game, 6 catches, 89 yards. Guys, this is a first-round pick wide receiver. He's doing what they expect him to do. Over the last couple of weeks, he followed up last week game, what is it, 2 weeks ago, we had 7 catches for 157 yards and a touchdown. Came out this week, he had 8 catches for 91 yards. Guys, every week he comes out and he plays better, especially in keeper and / dynasty leagues. You should be picking him up. DJ Moore with a great week this week. He's going to go up against Tampa Bay, and he should shine for sure.
Yeah, even when Devin Funchess comes back, I don't think it matters. Devin Funchess, his production was dropping, his targets are dropping. It's clear to me that the best wide receiver on that team is DJ Moore. I like this guy. So I think the only thing that holds him back is that Cam Newton is his quarterback. Nothing against Cam Newton. I like Cam Newton as a quarterback, but typically wide receivers don't have huge numbers in that offense. Their best wide receiver is Christian McCaffrey. So another wide receiver out there that's 41% available is Keke Coutee. He's playing Cleveland. It gives up the 5th most points to wide receivers. So he had a late start to the year. He had some injuries, so he had to wait a few games before he saw some action on the field. And then when he did, he had to share targets with Will Fuller. Will Fuller was having a very good year there and been very productive. You actually look at Will Fuller's numbers when he was on the field with Watson, they were lights out. I think a lot of that production could go Keke's way there. And so he starts late, gets on the field, shares production with Will Fuller, and then he gets re-injured, misses some time again. But if you look at the 3 full games this year, when he's been healthy for an entire game, he's been pretty productive. During those 3 games, he's averaged 10 targets per game, 7 catches, and 79 yards. He's a great complement to Hopkins. He's a guy that you need to pick up, and he's another one that's got greater value in dynasty leagues.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, just going to mention this one very briefly. Marquez Valdes-Scantling is 43% available, plays Arizona, who gives with the 10th fewest points. And honestly, we wanted to put this guy on this list just to say, I wouldn't be too excited about him. And here's why. Again, he plays Arizona, 10th fewest. But really the big thing at this point in the season, it doesn't look like he's developing too great. And he's just been a disappointment over the last few games. And so Scantling is a guy I would avoid. We've mentioned in the past, I understand he's been a guy that we've kept our eye on. Maybe you've kept your eye on him. But there is a point where we just say he's not quite developing and probably move on from that. I don't know if you 100% agree with that. That does sound awfully negative, but he just hasn't impressed.
Yeah, I don't think it means we're double-minded. It's not double speak. What it is in fantasy football, you have to be flexible, and you've got to be willing to change with changing information. There was a while there where it seemed like he was trending upwards, but in the last couple of games, his usage has dropped. He hasn't been that productive. And there's other things that are happening out there. If you look at, remember Jake Kumaro? He's about to come off the IR. I mean, there's just a lot of factors there right now that I'm just not very excited. He would have to have a productive 2 games in a row before I'd even be comfortable using this guy again. And for a lot of us now, you're heading into playoff season. Can you really trust a guy that's disappeared 2 weeks in a row? I don't think you can. He's a guy that, yes, going into next year might be huge. He could have a huge role there. I imagine that maybe Randall Cobb would be gone. But right now, no, I think that he's trending down.
All right, yeah.
Let's look at Tre'Quon Smith, wide receiver for the Saints. He's 48% available. Now he's playing Dallas, allowed the 3rd fewest points to wide receivers. This is a guy that he's going to be boom or bust. He's all or nothing, and that's a little scary. Like the reason why he's boom or bust, I think he's got talent, but one, if you look at that team, he's got so many guys ahead of him in terms of targets. You got Thomas there, Ingram, Kamara. So he's 4th on the list in terms of targets. So right away, he's going to have inconsistent touches. So right away, that's going to make his production boom or bust. Now, the reason why you need to consider him, one, he plays with Drew Brees. Drew Brees is having his best season ever as a pro. If you look at his numbers, his quarterback rating is lights out. If the season ended today, he would set the record for the best quarterback rating in a season. He's having a phenomenal year there. Now, he's had some big games, Smith has. He had one game where he had 3 catches, 111 yards, and 2 touchdowns. He had another game with 10 catches, 157 yards, and a touchdown. But he's also disappeared in some games where he's been nothing. And so at this point, I wouldn't trust him weekly in redraft leagues. But if you're in a dynasty league, he's got to be owned because he's just too talented to not have on your roster. To see how he finishes out the year, he's a guy that you're going to keep maybe going into next season. So,
all right. All right, how could we not talk about wide receiver Josh Reynolds? 49% available. He's receiving for the Los Angeles Rams. I still want to call them the St. Louis Rams. I don't know why I hold on to that. But anyways, they're going against Detroit, who is essentially a middle-of-the-line average defense as far as their pass defense goes. Reynolds has been phenomenal. He has filled in for Cooper Kupp, who was injured, and he's been great. Last game he had 6 catches for 80 yards and a touchdown. And the previous time he filled in for Cooper Kupp, he had 3 catches, 42 yards, and 2 touchdowns. He is very, very productive. But temper your expectations a little bit. They're not going to need to do what they did last week. Last week, his 6 catches for 80 yards and a touchdown, like what he did against the Chiefs, it's not going to happen again, right? That was 105 points was scored in that game. That was a massive shootout. That's not going to happen against the Lions. And so I guess, kind of temper your expectations, understand that. He's a good replacement. He's highly available. I like that, but I don't think he's quite going to be this guy who's consistently getting you 80, 90 yards and a touchdown.
I think he's done really well there. This one is bittersweet for me because he's filling in for Cooper Kupp, who one I love and I had in a couple leagues. I've been devastated with some injuries recently, Green and others, but it happens to everybody. It's part of the game. So, but yeah, he looked good. He's looked very good there. So I want to talk about Trey Quinn, wide receiver for the Redskins, who's 99% available. He's a slot receiver who's a rookie, and he's been filling in for Crowder that's been injured. Now, he saw his first significant production 2 weeks ago. In the first game, he came out, he had 4 catches for 49 yards. Then last week, he got to start again. He had 5 catches, 29 yards, and a touchdown. You actually played him in a league. Nice play, by the way. So I know you were kind of desperate for wide receivers in a 16-team league. Now, this week, he's playing Philadelphia. Now, Philadelphia has been getting gouged by wide receivers. They can't stop anybody in their backfield there. So I think that he's a guy that if you're very desperate, if let's say in a 16-team league that starts three wide receivers, he might be a guy that you could pick up there. He may have some value for you.
All right, here's the guy for people who are in leagues where you're absolutely desperate. Maybe it's 16 team, maybe it's super deep benches, whatever it might be. Maybe you're just awful at fantasy and you need a guy and none of these players have been available. What about 90% available David Moore? He's playing for the Seattle Seahawks, which is great because, why? He's got an awesome quarterback. I love Russell Wilson. He went off for 4 catches, 103 yards, and a touchdown. We don't have a whole lot to say on him. We don't have a huge history going back on him, but he did just have a huge game, and I think he's in a good situation on a team that needs receivers to step up for sure.
Yeah, he's had some touchdowns early in the year. At times, he's looked good. Right now, the number one wide receiver on that team is Tyler Lockett, obviously. Mm-hmm. And so, he's a guy to keep an eye on there. You talked about if you're desperate, the one area where maybe you want to play this guy is daily fantasy. You could probably get him for the bare minimum. And, in daily fantasy, the key to being successful, anybody knows to start the big names out there, but it's about finding those deals that you can have so you can save cap space. So I think about him in like maybe daily fantasy too.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's look at Antonio Callaway, the wide receiver for the Browns, who's 91% available out there. He's a very talented receiver that early in the year he made a lot of noise in the preseason. Going into the draft, he's a guy that a lot of people said could have first-round talent, but he had some off-the-field issues that really brought him down. Well, he had a nice game Sunday, 4 catches, 62 yards, and a touchdown. At times, he's looked like he could be a breakout wide receiver. Well, one, he's a rookie. But here's the thing on that team right now. You look at Jarvis Landry. The guy's had a disappearing act. He has just disappeared. I don't know what happened to him. He's just fallen off the last 4 or 5 games. He's a non-factor. And right now, the best wide receiver on there, as far as consistent fantasy production goes, would be Antonio Callaway. With that said, even though he's been more consistent than Jarvis Landry, that doesn't say a whole lot at this point. This week, he plays the Texans along these 6 fewest points to wide receivers. He's not a guy that I would start weekly. I would not trust him yet. But he is a guy that you could stash on your bench in keeper leagues and just watch and see how he finishes out the year. The one thing I do like about him, one, he's young, he's got talent, but Baker Mayfield looks like he's legitimate. I'm actually happy for Browns fans out there. I think you guys finally got your franchise quarterback. I like Baker Mayfield, and if this guy comes along, they could be one of those great combinations for years to come if you're in a dynasty league.
Absolutely, and just in time, it only took you about 20 years.
Yeah, so... Well, I'd make fun of you, but Vikings fans don't have a championship, and who knows if we ever will. So.
Right. All right, another guy here is Christian Kirk, and I want to highlight the fact when I talk about him that I really seriously want to emphasize that we talk about him in this context of keeper and dynasty leagues. He hasn't been absolutely phenomenal this year because his quarterback play has been bad. And so I like to pick him up. He really seems to be moving into that role as the number one wideout in the offense. He looks very impressive. He's performed very well. I'm very excited about him. And so he's definitely got a stash on your bench if you're, out of playoffs and you can't make it or whatever, and just to wait and keep. But he also does happen to have a good matchup this week against the Green Bay Packers. Again, he is the best receiver on that team. But if you just look at his log, and Rob, I think you can testify for this, it's just not impressive. We look at it, and I look at it, and I just think, it's just average. It's just okay. I'm waiting for that game for him to just break out, and that's all down to the quarterback situation. And so he's a guy who's just probably going to be till next year till he fully explodes, but he's certainly worth the roster spot.
Yeah, I don't want to bore you guys with sabermetrics, but if you get into some of these analytics about how he's done, he's actually been very productive, but it's not turning into big numbers. And like you said, it goes back to the quarterback playing that offense. With that said, there's been a lot of comparisons by people that play with him on his team and other players that have said he's very similar to Odell Beckham. He's got great hands. He's not a fast player, but he's very quick, come out of the cut. He runs good routes, things like that. I think he's going to have a bright future in the NFL, but it may not turn out to be great numbers for the rest of this year. But if you're in a dynasty league, he's another guy that you could stash on your bench. So,
All right.
So another guy out there is John Ross, who's 90% available. The Cincinnati wide receiver. He's had touchdown 3 weeks in a row. He's a former first-round pick. And so this guy's got upside. The downside of it is A.J. Green may come back, and if he does, that puts him as their third wide receiver because right now you have Boyd. Boyd's their number one guy. So if Green comes back, that puts him down there. But if Green misses time again, somebody's got to get the ball. That Cincinnati defense is brutal, and they've been giving up a lot of yards right now. In fact, historically speaking, they're on pace to give up more yards than any defense ever has. And so they're always throwing the ball, and he's benefited, like I said, touchdown 3 weeks in a row. So look at John Ross if A.J. Green misses another week.
All right, what about Adam Humphries? First of all, he plays for the Buccaneers, who are averaging 458 yards a game. That's best in the NFL. That's insane. Again, we talked about it earlier. The running game's not amazing. The defense is awful. He's had 4 touchdowns in 4 weeks. Deshaun Jackson has basically disappeared. Chris Godwin is not the sleeper wide receiver some people expected him to be. And O.J. Howard is out, leaving pretty much Mike Evans and, well, who else? Well, Cameron Brate's also a pretty good option, but with how much they throw the ball, they need a third guy. They really do. And Adam Humphries has been stepping up the last 4 weeks. And so, again, I think Adam Humphries, pretty short and simple, is a very good choice. I feel boring, but that's really, it seems simple to me. He's been scoring, and he's on a team that throws the ball a lot.
Yeah, I think this guy that's got a nice floor, but not a great ceiling. The reason why his ceiling is lower is there's a lot of weapons there. You look at Brate, Jackson, Evans, Godwin, things like that. But he's been statistically consistent lately. The positive side of it, he plays on an offense that has to throw the ball a lot. Like you mentioned earlier in the video, they lead the NFL in yards. I think it's 460 plus yards a game that they're having there because that defense is bad and they're always playing from behind. So he's a decent play. He's not a great play, but he's, for somebody out there, he could be a nice play. I think he's got a little more value in PPR leagues, but
yeah. All right, now I'm just going to go through and list a couple of wide receivers. I don't want to take too much time on these guys because most of them, I believe all of them, are not very highly available. But it's nice to have a little reminder to say, hey, make sure that if they're out there, right, make sure you keep your eye open. One is Sammy Watkins. He's only 12% available, but that offense is hot, and his quarterback, Patrick Mahomes, is playing so well. It's hard for me to imagine him not making a roster. Quincy Noon was an option. One guy I want to mention is Tyler Lockett. He's 13% available, and like you said a minute ago, he's probably the best wide receiver in that offense. The other week he had 5 targets, 5 catches, 107 yards, and a touchdown, and so he's starting to perform. And of course, another situation like Watkins, where his quarterback Russell Wilson is very good. Corey Davis at 13%. They need somebody. Seems like every week they're just dying for some receiver to step up, and he is, I believe, a former first-round pick. We look at Marvin Jones. He's 18% available. He was hurt, but he will be back soon. And when he does come back, he should have some value in a team that, lost Golden Tate, that doesn't have a great group of tight ends to throw the ball to. And so he's another good option. Then, of course, don't forget about Sterling Shepard, 21% available. When he's given the opportunity and he's not drowned by the talent on that team, he definitely has shown how good he can be. And so don't forget about him as well.
So I want to talk about 2 guys that you may be looking at out there that have great matchups, but I think I'm going to have to advise against. You got to stay away from. We go back about 5 weeks ago. We talked about upcoming schedules and how they had one of the best schedules for wide receivers, but a quarterback change has changed this drastically, and that's John Brown, 31% available, and Michael Crabtree, 34% available. This week they play Atlanta, allowing the 9th most points to wide receivers. But with Lamar Jackson at quarterback, like you mentioned, I don't think that you can trust either one of those. For those wide receivers that have value, Joe Flacco has to come back. He just simply needs to do that. We talk about Lamar Jackson. He only completed 13 passes the first time. This week, 14 passes. He's just not hitting the wide receivers quite a bit. You look at John Brown earlier. He's having a very good year there. But once again, with Lamar Jackson at quarterback, I just simply can't trust those guys. I would stay away from them. Another guy that maybe you consider there that I think's got a little bit of a sleeper appeal, though there's risk with it, is Josh Doxson, the wide receiver for Washington. So this week he plays Philadelphia, who gives up the 2nd most points to wide receivers. Paul Richardson's on the IR. Crowder's out again. Former first-round pick has had some consistent, although not great, production lately. But the 2 games since Colt McCoy has taken over, he's had 17 targets. Last year he had 6 touchdowns. So this is a guy that until Chris Thompson comes back or Crowder comes back, he could be a guy that has some sleeper appeal against Philadelphia that allows a lot of points to wide receivers.
Yeah.
So I'm talking about tight end Cameron Brate. So Howard was having a very good year, but went on the IR. He's done now. O.J. Howard's finished. Cameron Brate is 36% available out there. Now he plays Carolina, gives up the most points to tight ends. Now if you look at between the years 2016 and 2017, he had 14 total touchdowns. So this is a guy that's proven he can be productive. Once again, going back to what we've already said, in an offense that has to throw the ball a lot, I like Cameron Brate down the stretch there for somebody that you can pick up and run with through the fantasy playoffs.
All right, what about Austin Hooper, 17% available? They play the Ravens, who give the 14th most points to tight ends. He's been used a lot more frequently this year. He's been developed, especially as the season has gone on. He's a very interesting tight end because he's one of those tight ends that he's very matchup dependent. When he goes into a game against a team that gives up a lot of points to tight ends, he gets a lot of points. And if he goes against a team that doesn't give up a lot of points to tight ends, he doesn't get a lot of points. And so this could be just that, one of those weeks where he continues this trend he's been at all season, where he just plays according to the matchup. And so don't forget about Austin Hooper. He's certainly an option there at 17% available.
Let's look at Jack Doyle. He's about 20% available, 19 to 20% available out there. He plays the Jaguars this week, who give up the 12th most points to tight ends. So this is difficult because you also have Eric Ebron there. And Eric Ebron, I think now has got it up to 12 touchdowns for the year. It's been amazing. But no team in the NFL targets their tight ends more than the Colts do and Andrew Luck. And so I think there's production to go around there. He came out today. Jack Doyle had a touchdown there. Once again, like I said, Eric Ebron's been so good this year that it devalues him a little bit. So whereas Jack Doyle might have been a top 5 or 6 tight end, he's not any longer, but he does have value out there.
All right, what about David Njoku? He's 22% available, and while he does play the Texans, who give up the 8th fewest points to tight ends. First of all, I want to bring you back to what I talked about. We talked about Baker Mayfield earlier. The last 2 games, he's had a quarterback rating of at least 143 in both games. David Njoku, last game or last week for him or whatever, had 5 receptions for 63 yards and a touchdown. I don't think that this is one of those few times where it's a tough matchup, but that doesn't concern me much. And that's because they still have, Baker Mayfield's still got to throw the ball his way. Jarvis Landry hasn't really been the Jarvis Landry we expected him to be when we came into this season. As far as throwing the running backs to the backfield, I think the situation there is okay. It's not amazing. There's not a lot of wide receiving talent there. There's no second tight end to catch the ball a lot. Njoku, he's going to get his targets. He's going to get his catches. I don't think that's going to change based on the matchup at all. So I still like him for this week.
So I'll talk about Kyle Rudolph out there, 24% available. He's playing the Patriots this week, who give these 6 most points to tight ends. And so we were down on him in the preseason. I said this guy's overrated. I still believe that. I think he's overrated, and I think his year has supported that. He hasn't had a very good year. Although, if you look at in our start-sit question, a lot of people asked, well, one guy in particular said, do I go with Jimmy Graham this week? Do I go with Kyle Rudolph? A few people asked about that. We're not big on Kyle Rudolph, but we did say versus the Packers, we felt like he was going to have some value. And he had a very nice game tonight in terms of PPR value there. And against the New England Patriots, we think that he's going to rebound and have another decent, not great, but decent game. You can expect maybe 5 catches for 55 yards in this one. So he's about 25% available out there.
All right, and then of course the last tight end that I want to mention is Chris Herndon. Now he's 92% available. It's nice that he's so highly available. So if you are looking for a guy, if you're very desperate, he should definitely be out there. And while he does play Tennessee, who gives up the fewest points to tight ends, you do have to understand he's really taken off since week 6. Last week he had like 7 catches for 57 yards, I believe it was. And then he's had 3 weeks in a row with a touchdown. And so his production has really gone up. It is very interesting to see this year more than most years. Tight ends kept kind of seemingly coming out of nowhere to have good seasons and surprise us. And he's one guy who's been very under the radar because of this. And I like him. I wouldn't be too surprised if he continued that trend. Again, it is a tough matchup, but if you are looking for a guy 92% available, there is partially a reason for that. And so Chris Herndon is a fairly good option despite his tough matchup.
All right. So I'm not going to get a lot into this. Just real quick, some defenses. If you're looking to stream this week, you look at Kansas City, 65% available playing Oakland. Oakland gives up the 7th most points to defenses. You look at the last 4 games that had 17 sacks. I like a defense that's connected to a good offense. Pat Mahomes scores points that forces the opposing team to have to throw the ball a lot. That creates sacks, interception opportunities, things like that. So I like them. Another one is Seattle. 76% available playing San Francisco, allowing the 5th most points to defenses. Then you have Tennessee, 80% available versus the Jets, allowing the 4th most points to defenses. You got Miami. Now this one is tough. Miami is 90% available. Not a great defense per se, but they're playing the Bills, allow the most points to defenses. You got the Philadelphia Eagles, who are not a great defense, but they're playing Washington, who's been decimated. They're about 35% available. Now, Washington offensive line's missing 3 starters. Wide receivers are hurt. There's a lot of issues there, so that could be a nice play. You have Denver. That Denver defense has got a lot of talent there. They're 51% available playing Cincinnati. You've got Carolina at 51% available versus Tampa Bay, giving up the 3rd most points to defenses. You have Indianapolis versus the Jags, 56% available, giving up the Jags give up the 6th most points to defenses. Green Bay versus Arizona, giving up the 2nd most points to defenses, and Green Bay is 61% available. And then the last one is the Bills. The Bills defense is very underrated. They're 63% available, playing Miami, giving up the 9th most points to defenses. So there's a number of defenses that you can consider if you're desperate this week. So I think that's it. You want to close it out?
Yeah, no, absolutely, guys. As always, thank you so much for watching. Make sure to check out our Instagram, check out our community page, and just see some of the other things that we're doing every week as we continue to try to update you. As always, leave a comment down below. We'd love to help you as much as we can. Guys, thank you so much for watching. You have a great day, and God bless.